The first blow didn't meet her skin. It hit the air first, thick and heavy. That silence before it came was worse than the strike itself. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Ruby Lane stood motionless beside the stone hearth, the hem of her worn calico dress trembling against her bare ankles. She had long since learned that sometimes stillness could buy her a few more breaths before the storm broke. But that night her father wasn't drunk on noise. He was drunk on quiet despair, sharp-edged, cutting mean. The first thing to go was the chair. It didn't tip. It flew smashing against the wall near the door. Ruby didn't flinch. Flinching only made Hank Dobbs smile. Once he'd been a miner with dreams big enough to fill the canyons. Now he looked hollowed out by the earth he'd tried to conquer, eyes glassy, jaw slack, breath thick with whiskey that burned worse than fire going down. The bottle was nearly empty. "So this is what you do now," he muttered, voice slurred, hate steady. "Stand there like your damn mother! Useless!" Ruby's fingers tightened around the chipped tin plate in her hands. She didn't speak. Words were dangerous words, broke the fragile thread that kept his rage contained. And when that thread snapped, her ribs usually followed. He staggered toward her, his shadow stretching monstrous and long across the log walls as the lantern flickered. Outside, the canyon wind howled like a warning, but inside it was quiet, too quiet. "You think you're better than me." His voice was slow, mean, dragging itself across the room. Your mother thought that too. Thought her herbs and her soft smiles could fix the world. The bottle lifted. Ruby dropped the plate. It shattered loud as gunfire, and his eyes flicked to the floor. That heartbeat of distraction was her chance. She ran. Not fast enough. The backhand came hard and clean, sending her into the table. Pain flashed white across her vision. Then something inside her, a voice that wasn't the one that begged for mercy, rose up. It had teeth. "If I stay one more night, I'll die in pieces just like Mama did." For the first time in her life, Ruby moved before he did. She scrambled to her feet, shoved past him, and tore open the door. He shouted her name once, not with anger but disbelief, like a man watching his last bit of power walk out the door. She didn't stop for boots or a coat. The desert didn't care. The rocks didn't care. But the dark had always been kinder than him. The world outside was made of bone and dust, the pale remains of trees and cliffs that had watched better men fall. Ruby ran barefoot through brush and stone, each step leaving a prayer written in blood. The stars blinked above her like cold witnesses. The moon hung low, slicing through the night like a blade. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but her heart stayed alive. She didn't look back. Not at the cabin, not at the flickering window, not at the man calling her name as if he owned it. She ran until the cold numbed her feet, until her thoughts blurred into movement, until the desert swallowed her whole. Hours later, maybe a lifetime, she collapsed under a twisted juniper at the edge of a ravine, breath-ragged face streaked with blood and salt. The ground beneath her was red as rust, holy in its stillness. The cliffs above looked down like old judges, silent and unmoved. She pressed her face into the dirt. "Please," she whispered, not to God, not to Hank, but to the land itself. "Please let me vanish. Let me become something else. Let me not wake up there again." The wind answered not with mercy but with witness. Ruby's fingers dug into the soil. Beneath her palm, she felt something carved smooth, deliberate lines on a flat stone. Someone had marked it long ago. Beneath the carving hung a small bundle tied with sinew and feathers, hawk feathers. It wasn't much, but it wasn't him. It wasn't pain. It was a sign a thread of life from a world she hadn't yet seen. She smiled through cracked lips. Then the cold took her. In her dreams, her mother's hands were warm, braiding her hair with a red string. She saw sunlight in a canyon she'd never known heard words from a language she somehow understood. Then nothing. When light returned, it came as warmth, the kind that fed, not burned. At first, she thought it was death, it was too gentle to be life. But then came the smell, pine smoke, sage, wet earth. A calloused hand brushed her forehead, not with violence, but care. She flinched out of instinct, but no blow followed. Only a blanket laid across her shoulders and a bowl of broth set near her lips. Ruby Lane was no longer alone. Soon a voice would greet her not through words, but through firelight and silence. And the man who spoke without sound would begin to unmake the frightened girl her father tried to destroy. There was no shouting this time. No boots stomping, no curse tearing through the air. The quiet was real, the kind that felt alive. When Ruby Lane opened her eyes, the world didn't rush in. It crept back slow like water seeping through cracked stone. She was lying on a bed of pine boughs, wrapped in a thick buffalo hide. Above her, the ceiling of a shallow cave glowed faintly orange from a nearby fire. To her right, the flames crackled softly between two smooth rocks. To her left sat an old man cross-legged, stitching a strip of leather with steady hands. His skin was the color of the red canyon walls, weathered and deep as the land itself. Silver-gray hair tied back with a rawhide cord, eyes dark and calm still as river stone. When he finally looked at her, he didn't speak, didn't move closer, didn't even blink. Ruby's breath hitched. Every nerve in her body screamed to run, but she was too broken for flight. Bruised, frozen, and hollowed out, she curled into herself like a small animal that had forgotten how to trust warmth. The man didn't move, not even a twitch. Minutes passed before he reached beside him, lifted a small clay bowl, and set it near her with both hands, slow and respectful. A folded cloth followed. Then he simply went back to sewing as though she wasn't there. That was what undid her the absence of demand. No orders, no questions, no pity, just quiet presence. Her eyes filled before she even realized it. "Some men save you with words," she whispered hoarsely. "Others save you by saying nothing at all." Her fingers trembled as she reached for the bowl. The broth inside was warm, thin, flavored with strange herbs. Each sip stung her split lip, but it filled something deeper, something that hadn't felt full in years. Days passed like shadows crawling across stone. The old man never asked her name, never laid a hand on her except to clean a wound. Every morning there was a fresh bowl of broth, a new cloth herbs drying near the fire. She slept in fits, half in dreams, half in memory. Sometimes she heard her mother humming in a language that wasn't English. Sometimes she woke to find the man gone, returning hours later with roots fish or sprigs of wild mint. He moved through the canyon not as a visitor, but as if he belonged to it. It took Ruby 3 days to find her voice. "Why didn't you leave me?" she rasped one morning while he was stripping bark. He didn't stop. "Why didn't you let me die out there?" The man looked up. His eyes didn't flare or soften. They simply focused steady and knowing. "You don't throw away what the river delivers," he said, voice low and even, like wind before a storm. "You listen to why it brought it." Then he went back to work. By the 5th day, Ruby could sit up. Her ribs were still sore. The gash above her brow had scabbed over, but she could breathe again without fire in her lungs. That afternoon, the man pointed to himself. "Taye," he said. He tapped his chest once, eyes closing briefly, as if offering more than a name, something sacred. Ruby didn't give hers aloud. Not yet. That night she whispered it to the fire, just to make sure it still belonged to her. On the 6th day, she met the girl. Ruby was sitting by the stream, soaking her swollen feet in cold water when she heard quick, light steps on stone. "Who's the stranger?" Ruby turned. The girl couldn't have been more than 16. Dark braids, sharp eyes, a sling of firewood across her back. Dust coated her boots, but her voice carried confidence. "I'm a Hyoka," she said. "He's my uncle." Taye stepped out from the cave, nodded once to the girl, then looked toward Ruby. A Hyoka's gaze darted between them, unimpressed. "She doesn't look like much," she muttered. "Like a hawk with a broken wing." Ruby didn't react. She was too tired for pride. But Taye lifted his hand, a small motion that silenced the girl instantly. Ruby noticed the tension between them, protectiveness wrapped in defiance. That night, as Ruby lay under the stars for the first time in years, she whispered the name Ahyoka into the wind. It lingered on her tongue like a question she didn't yet understand. Over the following days, the girl came and went, sometimes watching Ruby like a hawk, sometimes asking sharp questions she wasn't ready to answer. Each time Taye stopped her before Ruby had to speak. Ruby began watching them too, how they moved together silent and synchronized, communicating through small gestures more than words. She longed to belong to that rhythm, not just healed but woven in. Woven. One morning, Taye placed something small and smooth in her hands, a bird carved from stone, its faded blue paint flaking from the wings. "My wife made this," he said quietly, for a child 18 years ago. Ruby froze. She had a friend, he went on, a woman with hair like wheat and hands that smelled of lavender. She came to learn to share. Her name was Mary Beth. Ruby's chest tightened. Mary Beth Dobbs. Her mother. Taye didn't ask. He didn't have to. The fire popped softly between them as Ruby turned the little bluebird charm over in her palms. She hadn't stumbled here by chance. Pain and wind had carried her straight into the place where her story had been waiting all along. She'd once belonged to this place. The canyon had known her before she ever knew herself. She wasn't just a runaway. She was the child of a promise, and soon she'd learn what that truly meant. But the past doesn't stay buried. It claws its way through the dirt, sending men with maps to dig up what should have been left alone. The first warning came with sound, something cold, metallic. Not the chirp of a bird, not the rustle of a rabbit. It was the faint jingle of spurs. Ruby Lane was crouched near the creek, rinsing the stone bowl Taye had carved long ago. Her hands froze mid-motion. The water kept flowing soft and silver, but her breath caught in her chest. She tilted her head, listening. There it was again, footsteps that didn't belong here. She placed the bowl down quietly, crouched low, and slipped up the hill with silent precision. The land had taught her how to move, like it was part of her. Weeks beside Taye had sharpened her instincts. She could feel danger long before it spoke. At the ridge, she saw them 3 men on horseback shadows stretched against the red rock horizon. Dust trailed behind like the ghosts of old sins. One had a rifle strapped to his back. Another swung a whiskey bottle from his saddle. The third leaned forward laughing as he pointed toward the valley below. Ruby crept closer, slow and careful, her body coiled tight as a drawn bow. "This here's the spot," one man said, slapping his thigh. "Map says so." The second snorted. Think there's gold in that spring if there ain't. The first chuckled. Some old fool, sure died believing there was. Got the map for a bottle and a favor from a drunk named Hank Dobbs. The sound of her father's name hit her like a hammer to the ribs. Even dead, he was still sending monsters after her. The past doesn't die in the dirt, it sends men to finish what it started. Ruby's stomach turned to ice. She slipped back down the ridge, careful not to break a twig. Her heartbeat roared in her ears as she darted through the canyon trails toward camp. Taye was already there, crouched by the fire, sharpening his knife with a river stone. Ahyoka leaned against the canyon wall, arms crossed, eyes alert. They're here, Ruby said, breath short. 3 of them. One's armed. They've got a map, my father's map. Taye didn't flinch. He just kept grinding the blade. They know there's water here, Ruby added. They know it's off the town records. Ahyoka stepped forward, bow slung at her shoulder. We could warn 'em off. 1 arrow in the air, Number. Taye's voice was firm, calm as thunder before it breaks. They'll come straight for us, Uncle Ahyoka argued. I know, he said. Lines deepened around his eyes. But they're just men. And men don't stay where they think the land itself doesn't want them. Ruby's jaw tightened. Her hands trembled not with fear, but with decision. You showed me the white root once, she said, quietly. The one with the milky center. Said it makes a man sick down to his bones. Taye's eyes met hers. He didn't speak. Ahyoka did. You're not thinking I am. Ruby cut her off. Taye shook his head. Poison's a weapon for prey. You're not prey. I know, Ruby said, fire flickering in her tone. But I've lived with predators. I know how they think. Without another word, she turned toward the cave. Her hands moved with purpose. White root, a stone bowl, strips of dried venison, crushed acorn flour. By sundown, the plan was set. When the men rode through the canyon path, they found a woman standing alone, clutching a pot of stew. Her face was dusty, her hair wild, shoulders slumped in feigned exhaustion. The man with the rifle grinned. Well, look what we got here. Desert flour. Ruby kept her gaze down. The second man reached for the pot. Got something for us? Food, she murmured. No trouble. Just peace. They laughed, took the pot, and ate like starving wolves. It didn't take long. 10 minutes later, one dropped his spoon. Sweat poured down his face before he doubled over, choking. What the hell? Another groaned, clutching his gut. The third tried to stand, staggered, and vomited into the dirt. Panic spread like wildfire. The man with the rifle dropped it and scrambled for his horse. Another shouted about cursed water, about ghosts guarding the spring. None of them stayed. They fled into the dusk, leaving only echoes behind. Ruby stood there, breathing slow, steady. When the canyon fell quiet again, she finally exhaled. Turning around, she saw Taye standing a few paces away, arms folded. He didn't speak. His face wasn't angry. It was heavier than that. What kind of world, he said softly, teaches a child to serve poison with such quiet hatred? The words cut deeper than her father's fists ever had. Ruby swallowed hard. I didn't do it out of hate, she said quietly. I did it because they were going to take everything again. Taye nodded once, slow and solemn, then walked past her toward the firelight. From the shadows, Ahyoka stepped forward, eyes wide between fear and awe. You scared him half to death, she said under her breath. Ruby didn't answer. The wind carried her only thought the land had taught her to fight back, but not to hate. Maybe more than that, Ahyoka's voice had been teasing, but Ruby Lane didn't smile. Her eyes stayed on the canyon below, where the 3 riders had vanished into the dusk. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel hunted, yet freedom still felt just out of reach. That night, she didn't lie beside the fire. Instead, she climbed to a high ridge, pulling her knees to her chest, as the moonlight painted silver veins across the red rock. The wind was still the stars, sharp and unblinking. In her palm, the bluebird charm turned over and over, warm from her touch. She wasn't here by chance. This land, this man, this quiet, they had all been waiting for her. Tomorrow, Taye would tell her why. Tomorrow she'd learn what blood and memory had been trying to say all along. When dawn came, the canyon felt colder than it should. The air carried the dry scent of juniper and old ash curling through the dying fire. Ruby woke, stiff and sore, from sleeping on stone, the bluebird charm resting in her lap like a prayer left unfinished. Below, Taye moved about camp with his usual quiet grace. He added wood to the fire, checked the traps along the creek, and laid bundles of herbs beneath the drying rack. He didn't glance up, he didn't need to. Ruby Rose brushed dust from her dress and made her way down the slope. Her bones ached, not from wounds, but from everything she'd carried for too long. The echoes of last night still lingered, the McGraws' panic, their retreat. Taye's voice like thunder held back. What kind of world teaches a child to serve poison with such quiet hatred? She hadn't answered then, but she would now. Taye sat on a low rock, carving a stick into a sharp point. Ahyoka knelt nearby, skinning a rabbit with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 100 times. Her sharp eyes flicked between them, like she could feel something important brewing. Ruby approached slowly, the bluebird charm cupped in her hands. "I think I remember," she said softly. Taye looked up. "The bird," she whispered. "And the blanket. My mother had one like it. She used to hum while she worked. No words, just sound that felt safe." Taye laid down the stick. Reaching into a weathered satchel, he drew out something wrapped in hide. He unrolled it carefully. It was a wool blanket, faded and thin, its indigo diamonds crossed with ochre lines nearly worn smooth. Ruby gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. "That's it," she breathed. "That's hers." Taye shook his head gently. "No," he said, voice deep as the canyon. "It was yours." He spread it between them like an offering. "My wife wove this," he said, "for the child of a white woman named Mary Beth Dobbs." Ruby dropped to her knees, fingertips brushing the cloth. It was softer than memory, still alive with color and care. "She came here," Taye continued. "Alone. Scared, but curious. Brought medicine, bandages, salves. We traded knowledge. She didn't come to take, she came to learn. Lila May saw something in her, a heart open to more than her own people. They became sisters of the root and the wind." Ruby's voice trembled. She never spoke much about this place, but when things were bad, she'd hum like she was somewhere else, somewhere safe. "She was safe here," Taye said quietly, "until he came." Ruby's eyes darkened. "My father?" Taye nodded once. He took her east. She never came back. But she left this. He reached again into his satchel, this time, pulling out a small bundle beads wrapped in red cloth, a sprig of sage bound by twine, a smooth stone polished to a soft shine. "She meant for her daughter to have it," he said. Lila May believed that daughter would return one day, not as a visitor, but as part of this land. Ruby's fingers trembled as she touched it, afraid it might disappear. "She thought I'd come back." Taye's gaze softened. "No," he said. "She thought you'd never truly left." Silence stretched between them, sacred, heavy, full. Then Ruby whispered, "Blood makes you kin, but truth makes you whole." She didn't know where the words came from. They simply felt right. From that morning on, everything began to change, not in bursts, but like slow water carving stone. Ruby rose with the sun, followed deer tracks through the cliffs, ground berries into poultices, learned the rhythm of the canyon. Taye didn't teach her with words. He showed her, and she listened. Even Ahioka began to soften. She taught Ruby to tie sinew without fraying it, to peel bark without hurting the tree, to find sweet grass even when the ground was dry. The land itself seemed eager to teach her. Ruby began to understand that pine needle tea could chase away fever, that the wind shifted pitch before rain, that silence wasn't emptiness, it was presence. Her hands grew steady, her back straightened. She was no longer a broken girl trying to survive. She was becoming something new, something whole. One evening by the fire, Ruby stitched a leather pouch, while Taye stirred the embers beside her. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She asked about my mother, about me. Taye didn't look up. "Stories come when hearts are ready to carry them," he said. Then his eyes met hers. "And now you're not just carrying it, Ruby. You're walking it." That night, Ruby lay beneath a sky full of stars, the healing bundle pressed to her heart, and the bluebird charm resting in her palm. Her past wasn't a curse anymore. It wasn't a scar, it was a root. And from that root, she would grow. By morning, the wind had changed again. Something new was coming. Taye was already standing by the ridge when Ruby Lane reached him, his gaze fixed on the southern horizon. Ahioka stood beside him, arms crossed tight against the chill. Far below, in the wash of morning light, the faint gleam of horses and riders appeared, small shapes moving steady across the open plain. "They're not here for water," Ahioka said, squinting. "Look at 'em, too clean, too polished." Ruby narrowed her eyes. These men didn't ride like prospectors or outlaws. Their movements were measured, deliberate. One rider carried a square case strapped to his back, its brass latches glinting. "A surveyor's pack," Taye muttered. "Land agents?" Ruby asked. "Worse," he said. "The kind of folks who think a map is more real than the mountain it's drawn on." A chill crawled up Ruby's spine. "They're coming to measure?" Ahioka said quietly. "Not the water, the worth." Ruby's fingers closed around the bluebird charm in her pocket. She had faced fists, hunger bullets, and cruelty, but this was something different. Something quieter. More dangerous. These were men who conquered land not with guns, but with paper. By tomorrow she'd know what Lot 49 meant, and what she'd be willing to do to keep this land hers. The dust rose long before the riders arrived. From her spot on the ledge, Ruby watched the wagon draw near, white paint gleaming the kind surveyors used when they came in the name of progress. 4 riders flanked it all clean and pressed hats stiff with pride. They didn't look for shelter. They didn't look for water. They rode like men who already believed this place belonged to them. Taye stood behind, her arms folded. "They'll come to measure," he said flatly. "Not to ask." Ruby's throat tightened. "And if we say no, they won't hear it." Down below, Ahioka checked, her bowstring eyes burning like flint. "Let 'em come close," she said. "I'll scare the papers right out of their teeth." Ruby almost smiled, but the weight in her chest wouldn't lift. By mid-morning, the wagon reached the flat ridge above the sacred spring. One man stepped down tall, polished, a silver-tipped cane in hand, though he didn't need it. His coat was pressed, his boots spotless. The kind of man who'd never spent a night without a roof. Another man set up a wooden tripod, mounting a brass scope and tilting it toward the canyon walls. Taye didn't move. Ruby did. "I'm going," she said. Ahioka hissed through her teeth. "Why?" "Because if we wait, they'll take more than they came for." Taye's dark eyes studied her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Be still as stone. Speak only what's yours to speak." "I will." Ruby walked the half-mile down the ridge-braid, tight footsteps, sure. The men saw her coming but didn't tense. The one with the cane turned, tipping his hat with a polished smile. "Good morning, miss," he said, his accent crisp and Eastern. "Didn't expect company this far out." "This is my home," Ruby said evenly. He raised a brow, amused. "Is it now?" She ignored the tone. "Why are you here?" He smiled again, stepping forward until his boots touched red dust. "Name's Eli Boone, Land Assessor, Harmony Creek Development. We're charting the area for a settlement project." He pulled a rolled parchment from his coat and unfurled it with a practiced flick. "This section here, Lot 49. Rich soil, steady water. Ideal for agriculture or perhaps a retreat." Ruby stared at the paper. The lines carved through her home like scars, her canyon reduced to coordinates and claim numbers. "This land belongs to no ledger," she said firmly. "It carries stories, not deeds." Boone nodded with polite indifference. "We respect heritage, of course. Harmony Creek seeks to build unity, not erase it." Coordinates locked his assistant called from behind the tripod. "Soil test shows good yield." Ruby stepped closer. "You want harmony?" she said. "Then listen before you measure." That night Ruby sat by the fire, the map spread across her lap. She'd taken it from Boone, he'd let her. That was what scared her most. He smiled the whole time, she said quietly. Like he already saw the future and we weren't in it. Ahyoka kicked a stone into the flames. "We should burn that damned map." "No," Taye said softly. "Let it remind us what they see." Ruby traced a finger across the black grid lines slicing through the heart of the spring. "They don't need bullets to take your land," she said. "Just a smile and a map." The next morning, Ruby dressed in the leather vest Taye had given her, not for battle, but for ceremony. "I want to see Harmony Creek," she said. "You can't trust him," Ahyoka warned. "I don't," Ruby answered. "But I need to see what he's building." Ahyoka handed her a small pouch of herbs. "Then take something of the land with you." Ruby tucked it into her belt and rode out. Silverton was 2 days away, dusty miles of scrub and sun-baked rock giving way to rolling hills and the faint shimmer of something too neat to be natural. When she reached town, she tied her horse behind the general store and walked. Harmony Creek was new, too clean, too orderly. The kind of place built from plans, not roots. At the end of the street stood a white building with gold letters where tomorrow takes root. Inside, Boone sat behind a polished desk, speaking to a woman about irrigation grants. When he saw Ruby, he smiled that same rehearsed smile and gestured for her to sit. She didn't. "I read your plans," she said. He leaned back. "And you're not building harmony," she said. "You're building fences." Boone folded his hands. "Fences keep peace, miss." She didn't give her name. "You may not see it now," he continued smoothly, "but settlers bring roads, schools, churches, community. That's what I'm offering." Ruby reached into her pouch and placed the bluebird charm on his desk. "My mother came from your world," she said. "She brought healing here. She never needed fences to belong." Boone's smile faded, his eyes flicking to the carving. "What is this?" "A promise," Ruby said softly. "One you haven't earned yet." She turned and walked out, leaving him silent behind the desk. When she returned to the canyon, the men were gone, but wooden stakes pierced the soil, red flags fluttering like warnings in the wind. No gunfire, no threats, just quiet invasion. That night, Taye said nothing. He only pressed his wife's beaded necklace into Ruby's hand and gave a single nod. Ahyoka stood nearby, arms folded. "He's giving it to you," she said. "You're the bridge now." "I didn't ask to be," Ruby whispered. Doesn't matter, Ahyoka said. The river doesn't ask permission to flow. Ruby sat long after they'd both gone to sleep, the stolen map in her lap, the firelight flickering over its lines. The land had chosen her, and now it was asking her to fight for it. Lot 49 wasn't just a stretch of land, it was a dividing line. And Ruby Lane had just crossed it. Tomorrow she'd ride back to Harmony Creek, not to beg, but to bargain. She wasn't the frightened girl hiding behind canyon walls anymore. She was the woman who stood still so the land could keep breathing. When she rode into town, Harmony Creek looked almost too perfect. Men in clean shirts stacked lumber like clockwork. Women swept porches that had never known dust. Children ran between wagons laughing under the careful eyes of strangers who didn't notice how quiet the place really was. It gleamed, but it didn't live. Ruby crossed the main road and stepped into Eli Boone's office. He looked up from his papers, smiling as if he'd expected her all along. Miss Lane, he said smoothly, I was wondering when you'd return. Ruby didn't sit. She dropped a small bundle wrapped in cloth onto his desk. It landed with a soft, deliberate thud. What's this? He asked. A gift, she said. Wild tobacco dried from the same spring your men are trying to chart. He raised an eyebrow. Symbolic ceremonial? Boone unwrapped it carefully, cautious not to offend. And what ceremony are we beginning? Not a ceremony, Ruby said. A negotiation. He paused, curious. Go on. I want full protection for the canyon, she said, voice steady. No drilling, no fences, no red lines on any of your maps. No one steps past the redstone gate without consent. Boone leaned back, exhaling. You don't own that land, Miss Lane. I belong to it, she replied. And it belongs to me. That's older than any deed. He studied her, half amused, half wary. Do you know what it costs to stop a plan that's already in motion? Yes, Ruby said, pulling a folded paper from her vest. Which is why I brought something worth more than gold. She laid her mother's worn ledger on the desk. The pages were yellowed, corners frayed, but every name and note still visible. My mother kept records, Ruby said quietly. People she treated settlers, their wives, children who couldn't pay a doctor. Look at the names. Some of them sit on your council now. Boone flipped through it, his smile fading as he read. They trusted her, Ruby continued. They'll trust her daughter too. He looked up. And what exactly are you proposing I become your liaison? Ruby said. Between Harmony Creek and the canyon, you leave Lot 49 untouched. I'll give you what your investors want: cooperation, peace, and something you can't buy. He frowned. And what's that? Ruby's lips curved slightly. Authenticity. That night back by the fire, Ahyoka paced behind her. You just handed him your mother's work, she said. Ruby shook her head. I handed him an invitation. He hasn't accepted it yet. Taye sat nearby, braiding a strip of hide, silent for a long while. I don't trust him, Ahyoka muttered. I don't either, Ruby replied. But I understand him now. His world is made of paper. Ours is made of stone. I'm the only one who can walk between them without being crushed. Taye finally spoke, his voice low and heavy. What you're offering is dangerous. Ruby met his eyes. So is doing nothing. He nodded, one slow grave, like the canyon itself agreed. 3 days later, Boone returned. No wagons, no guards. Just a satchel and the dust of a long ride on his boots. Ruby met him beneath the redstone gate, where the canyon narrowed into sacred ground. He handed her a folded paper. What is this? She asked. A draft, he said. A contract. She unfolded it. The words were thick with legal language, but the meaning was clear. Lot 49 will be reclassified as a cultural sanctuary, Boone explained. No construction, no trespassing without permission. Ruby looked up, and in return, Boone met her gaze. You'll speak for the canyon. Advise Harmony Creek. Help us name things properly. Keep us from crossing lines we shouldn't. Ruby took a slow breath. You know you'll lose investors over this. 2 already pulled out, he said. But others like the idea of legacy. Ruby nodded once. You'll send people here. Yes. Some curious, some skeptical. You'll need to hold your ground. She stepped aside. You can come this far, she said quietly. No farther without invitation. Boone smiled this time, genuinely. Understood. That night the canyon breathed differently, not in fear, but in anticipation. Ruby sat between Taye and Ahyoka by the fire, the signed paper glowing in her hands. So, what now? Ahyoka asked. Are we a village? A museum? Ruby looked at her, the firelight dancing in her eyes. No. We're a voice. A voice, Ahyoka scoffed. Ruby tossed a stick into the flames, sparks rising into the dark. Sometimes she said softly, a voice is all that stands between a people and being erased. The days that followed were full of footsteps. Evelyn Hart came first, bringing food as thanks for herbs Taye had once given her son. A young couple followed, asking Ruby to bless their newborn in the name of the canyon. Then came a group of students, sketchbooks in hand, eager to learn from the land instead of owning it. Ruby didn't grant every request. She listened, she guided, she translated. She became more than a bridge. She became a threshold, a place where 2 worlds could meet, and for once not destroy each other. By the 7th sunrise, a hand-painted wooden sign stood beneath the Red Canyon Gate, Lot 49. Not for sale. Sanctuary ground. By living agreement. Ahyoka had painted the letters herself. Taye blessed the earth with sage smoke, and Ruby Lane placed the bluebird charm atop the post. I thought you'd keep it close, Ahyoka murmured. I am, Ruby said quietly. And it was true. The charm didn't need to sit in her pocket anymore. It belonged here now, in the land that remembered her name. But peace is a guest, not a resident. Just as the canyon began to breathe again, new hoofprints appeared in the sand. Not from Harmony Creek, not from settlers, from someone who had been watching from farther out, someone who didn't believe in sanctuaries, someone with her father's eyes. Tomorrow, Ruby would face the past one final time, not as a girl running from it, but as a woman standing in its path. The storm didn't start with thunder. It came with silence. Hoofbeats on dry earth, dust curling like smoke on the horizon. A lone rider slouched in the saddle wrapped in a tattered army coat, face half-shadowed. He didn't ride like a lost man. He rode like someone who knew exactly where he was going and hated what he'd find there. Ruby spotted him from the ridge, standing beside the stone gate of Lot 49. Her hand tightened around the braided rope hanging from her belt. She didn't blink. Ahyoka shaded her eyes. You know him? Ruby's voice came out low, rough like it had traveled through years of silence. I knew his shadow before I knew his name. Ahyoka's jaw clenched. Should I get Taye? Ruby shook her head. No. This is mine. She descended the ridge with steady steps, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. The man dismounted, dusted off his boots, and looked around like he was disappointed the world hadn't crumbled without him. When his eyes found hers, he grinned not kindly, but with recognition. Well, I'll be damned, Hank Dobbs drawled. Didn't think you'd last this long, girl. But here you are, playing priestess in the sand, all dressed up in feathers and stone. Ruby didn't move. What do you want, Hank? He smiled wider, yellow teeth glinting. Same thing I've always wanted. What's mine? This land was never yours. He stepped forward, boots grinding gravel. No, but your mother was. And everything she touched, everything she bled on belonged to me. That includes you. And this little patch of dirt you're squatting on. Ruby's voice was steady as steel. You buried her in a nameless grave. You beat your daughter till she forgot her own voice. Now you want the land she ran to. His eyes flared, but he laughed a sharp, ugly sound. You sound just like them now, he sneered. All that talk about spirits and stories, but you're still mine? Blood says so. No, Ruby said, her tone turning cold. Blood's just the rope. I cut it when I ran. Back at camp, Ahioka paced the fire-circle bow slung across her shoulder. She shouldn't face him alone, she snapped. Taye sat cross-legged near the fire, eyes closed, expression calm. She isn't alone, he said softly. She stands with everyone who's ever walked this land before her. Down at the gate, Hank followed Ruby to the stone arch, but stopped just short. Something in his gut twisted. He saw the beads tied to the posts, the carvings marked by hands that weren't his, the faint smoke from the ceremonial fire still rising. He saw belonging, and it made him uneasy. You think you built something real out here? He scoffed. What is this? Some kind of cult? Ruby didn't answer. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded, yellowed document stamped by a courthouse seal. Claim of inheritance, he said. By law, based on your mama's marriage, I got rights to this place. Ruby took the paper without touching him. She looked at it, then tore it clean in half. You can't tear a deed, Hank barked. This canyon doesn't answer to your courts, Ruby said evenly, or to men who mistake pain for ownership. His hand twitched toward his belt, not for a gun, but for the same knife he'd once kept by the bed. But before he could draw it, Ahioka appeared from the rocks, bow raised and drawn. I'd think twice, she said, voice low. Hank froze. Taye emerged behind Ruby's staff in hand, not threatening but immovable as the stone itself. Hank looked between them, the girl who had defied him, the warrior with the steady hands, the elder, who saw right through him. Something inside him broke. You think this place'll protect you forever? He muttered. No, Ruby said softly. But it doesn't have to. Just long enough. By sundown, the dust from his horse had faded down the trail. Ruby knelt by the fire, her hands still trembling. Taye placed a cup of cedar tea beside her. She didn't drink. Ahioka sat across from her, arms folded, but no longer tense. You did it, she said quietly. Ruby shook her head. No, I didn't defeat him. Her gaze stayed on the flames. I just stopped carrying him. She reached into her pouch and untied the healing bundle. Inside, wrapped in red cloth, was a small note, edges worn, ink faded, written in her mother's hand. If she comes back, give her this truth you were never born to break. You were born to bend the wind. Bend it. But never let it carry you anywhere you don't choose to go. Ruby Lane wept for the girl who had run, for the woman who had stayed, and for the mother who left her a map written not in ink or law, but in love. That night the canyon gathered around a sacred fire. There were no speeches, just breath drum smoke and stone. Ahioka brushed white ash across Ruby's knuckles. Taye placed the healing bundle in her hands, the same ceremonial pouch worn by the women who'd stood between storms and their people. Ruby tied it around her waist and stepped into the circle's center, not hiding anymore, not mending, but whole. "Tomorrow," Taye murmured, "they'll come. They'll want to hear the story." Ruby nodded. "Then I'll tell it," she said. Not with fear, not with fire, with truth. Tomorrow she would no longer be the canyon's voice, she would be its memory. The dawn after the fire ceremony broke golden and soft. Light spilled through the canyon walls like water, touching everything it loved. The wind had changed it, no longer howled. It whispered through the junipers, brushing their needles like fingers through hair. Ruby stood by the red gate as the first visitors arrived. Not soldiers, not surveyors, but families, elders, a teacher from the Silverton schoolhouse, a journalist, even an investor from Harmony Creek, the only one brave enough to come wearing plain clothes, hat in hand. They had come because of the whispers of a woman who stood against a claim with nothing but a story, of a place that refused to be divided by lines and lots. Taye stood to her right, quiet as the canyon itself. Ahioka to her left, bow slung but untouched. Ruby stepped forward wearing her mother's beads and the ceremonial pouch. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She spoke of Mary Beth Dobbs, the white woman who came not to take, but to listen. Who learned the medicine of the land not as a secret to sell, but as a song to remember. She told of the springs, the fire circles, and the red walls that held every footprint, even the painful ones. She spoke of Taye's silence and Ahioka's fury, and how both had taught her what true strength looked like. And finally she told them about herself. Not the beaten child, not the runaway girl, but the woman who came back not to reclaim, but to restore. When she finished, no one clapped. That silence was the right kind. Some bowed their heads. Some wept quietly. One by one, they offered tokens. A sheriff left his badge upon a stone, his promise not to cross borders he didn't understand. A boy laid down a feather he'd found along the trail. A woman handed Ruby an old photograph, her grandmother in buckskin long, hidden in a family drawer. No one brought solutions. They brought recognition, and that was enough. By dusk, Eli Boone appeared not with contracts or company men, but on foot dust clinging to his boots. "I've filed the final papers," he said, holding out a folded document. "The canyon's been marked protected state, recognized sanctuary, confirmed." Ruby read the ink that was still drying. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't do it for you," Eli replied. "I know," she said softly. "But maybe next time you'll do the right thing for someone else." He looked around the canyon, its colors deep and endless. "Funny," he murmured. "I came here to build something. Turns out it was already here." He left without another word. That night, Ruby sat beside the fire with Taye and Ahioka, watching sparks climb into the stars. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. What had to be said had already been lived. Taye passed her a small pouch filled with seeds, tobacco, cedar, sunflower. "For planting?" she asked. He shook his head. "For sharing." Later, Ruby walked alone to the stone gate. The bluebird charm still perched on the wooden sign, weathered by sun and wind, yet unbroken. She brushed her fingertips across its wings and gazed out toward the horizon. More would come, some with open hearts, others with closed fists. But they would find her standing here, not as a wall, not as a weapon, but as something far stronger. A memory made flesh, a keeper of truth, a daughter of the land, not the man. Healing, she thought, doesn't erase what's been done. It teaches you to carry it without letting it own you. In the years to come, the canyon changed, but not in the ways the maps had planned. It became a place of pilgrimage, of storytelling, and silence, a place where the wind itself felt sacred. Ruby Lane never left. She didn't have to. The world came to her not to conquer, but to listen. And when someone asked, "Whose land is this?" she smiled and said, "It belongs to those who choose to hear." That was her legacy, not survival, not revenge, but reclamation. A voice carried on the canyon wind, clear, fierce, and free, still wild, still whole, still hers. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you